Watson. Recognized implications of Pavlovian theory founded American behaviorism believed that most fears are conditioned responses to stimuli that were originally neutral, demonstrated that phobias can be taught. Skinner believed that people learn to act deliberately on their environments in order to bring about desired consequences. Thorndike's law of effect. Correct responses after trial and errors become stamped in when received satisfying effect. Brown versus Board of Education. The assignment of African American children to separate and inferior public schools is a denial of equal protection under the 14th Amendment. Each state must provide equal educational opportunity to all children within its jurisdiction regardless of race. Park v. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Mills v. Board of Education. These two cases found that exclusion of children with handicaps from public school is a denial of equal protection. States have a duty to provide equal educational opportunities to all children regardless of race, color, national origin, native language, sex, and disability under the 14th Amendment. Mills v. Board of Education. Park v. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Park equals Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children. Procedural due process. Gauze v. Lopez. Schools may not want to suspend or expel children without some sort of fair, impartial due process procedures to label children without due process. No Child Left Behind Act. Provides financial assistance to schools with high concentrations of children from disadvantaged homes, requires statewide reading and mathematics tests each year in grade 3-8. Each school must attain academic proficiency for all students in 12 years and document progress toward that goal. Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. The Protection of Pupil Rights Act. Need written parental consent before a pupil can be required to submit to a survey, analysis, or evaluation that reveals certain types of personal information. Americans with Disabilities Act. Equal opportunity to individuals with disabilities in employment, public accommodation, transportation, state and local government services, and telecommunications. Zero Reject Principle. Stay put rule. Unless parents and the school agree, students remain in his or her present placement during any due process proceeding. Hobson v. Henson. African American and poor children were disproportionately assigned to the lower tracks based on group-administered aptitude tests, ruled that tracking was a violation of equal protection laws. Diana v. State Board of Education. Guadalupe Organization, Incorporated v. Tempe Elementary School District. Larry P. v. Riles. PASE v. Hannon. Decided that the use of IQ tests within the context of a multifaceted assessment process as outlined in IDEA was not likely to result in racially or culturally discriminatory classification decisions. The IEP team is composed of grade retention. Studies have found no lasting beneficial effect may be detrimental in terms of self-concept and personal and social adjustment. The method for assignment to a particular grade must be reasonably related to the purpose of providing appropriate instruction and furthering education. Behavioral Intervention Plan. Manifest Determination Review. Child Find. Carl Rogers believe that all people have a need for positive regard that results from an underlying wish to be loved and respected. Other people provide this positive regard. We are dependent on others, and our view of ourselves and our self-worth is a reflection of how we think others view us. Humanistic theory. Client-centered case consultation. Consultee-centered case consultation. Primary goal is to remediate the shortcomings in the consultee's professional functioning that are responsible for difficulties. Client improvement is a secondary goal, no direct assessment of the client. Program-centered administrative consultation. Consultee-centered administrative consultation. Goal is to improve the professional functioning of members of an administrative staff. Consultant agrees to work with the organization on a long-term basis. Bergen and Craddock-Wales Behavioral Operant Consultation Model. Erickson Stages of Development. Trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shamed-out, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus role, diffusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, ego, integrity versus despair. Social cognitive learning theory. We learn by observing the behavior of another person, called a model. Thematic apperception test. Children's apperception test. For children ages 3-11, projective measure in which a child will project his current feelings and issues by telling stories about 10 pictures of animals in various settings, designed to assess personality, level of maturity, and psychological health. Steps in problem-solving consultation. 1. Define the problem. 2. Analyze the problem. 3. Plan an intervention. 4. Evaluate your outcome. Type I error. When you say something is true but it is not. Type 2 error. Stating something is false but it is really true. T-score. Mean of 50, SD of 10. Z-score. Mean of 0, SD of 1. Least restrictive environment. Part of idea. Children with disabilities are to be placed in the least restrictive environment possible. / Each disabled child must be placed in regular classrooms as much as their disability permits. Correlation coefficient. Shows relation of two sets of data. Pearson R is the most common, can range from +1 to -1. Regression. Provides an equation that describes the relationship between the two variables. Standardized scores. Express a person's distance from the mean in terms of standard deviation of the distribution, continuous and have equality of units, allow for comparison between individuals. The Universal Nonverbal Intelligence Test. A test without language made for kids 5 to 17.11 years old, requires the use of sign language and other hand gestures. Free and appropriate education. All children are entitled to an adequate free education despite how severe their disabilities may be. Deborah P.V. Turlington. Schools must prove that they have educated a student sufficiently before they can be given a graduation test. The Perkins Act authorizes federal funds to support vocational education programs to provide individuals with the academic and technical skills needed to succeed in a knowledge and skills-based economy. Honig v. Doe prohibited SPED students from being suspended for more than 10 days, required manifestation determination, ensures parental rights with safeguards such as stay put. Steps in the modeling process. 1. Attention. 2. Retention. 3. Reproduction. 4. Motivation. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. National law that protects qualified individuals from discrimination based on their disability. Rowley v. Board of Education. Public schools have to provide an adequate education, not the best education. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Private speech. Speech that is spoken and directed to themselves, used to guide behavior and thought, gives ability to try out ideas. Vygotsky suggests it facilitates thinking and controls behavior, peaks around 4 to 7. Readiness. Child's readiness or maturity level to enter school. Fragile X syndrome. Caused by FMR1 gene impairment, can range from learning disabilities to more severe cognitive or intellectual disabilities. Most common known cause of autism or autistic-like behaviors. Symptoms can include physical and behavioral features and delays in speech and language development. 4 pillars of assessment. Norm reference tests, interviews, observations, informal assessment. 6 principles of IDEA. 1. Zero reject. 2. Non-discriminatory evaluation. 3. Appropriate education. 4. Least restrictive environment. 5. Procedural due process safeguards. 6. Parent and student participation. Howard Gardner 7 Multiple intelligences. 1 Verbal linguistic, 2 Logical mathematical, 3 Visual spatial, 4 Body kinesthetic, 5 Musical rhythmic, 6 Interpersonal, 7 Intrapersonal. 4 Ethical principles in school psychology. 1 Respect for dignity of person, 2 Responsible caring, 3 Integrity in professional relationships, 4 Responsibility to community and society. Mary Ainsworth. Strange situation involved observing children ages 12 to 18 months responding to a situation where they were left alone and then reunited with their mother. Childhood disintegrative disorder. Condition in 3 and 4-year-olds who have normally developed to age 2 over several months. A child with this will deteriorate in intellectual, social, and language functioning from previously typical behavior. Score descriptions of MR. 55-69 equals mild, 40-54 equals moderate, below 40 equals severe. Kohlberg's stages of moral development. 1 Pre-conventional, avoidance of punishment. 2 Conventional, where most people are, social norms and avoidance of disapproval. 3 Post-conventional, high ethics and principles of conscience. Factorial ANOVA. An analysis of variance used when there are 2 or more independent variables. When there are 2, the ANOVA is called a two-way ANOVA. 3 independent variables would use a three-way ANOVA, etc. Deviation IQ. Modern statistical conception of IQ introduced by psychologist David Wexler. IQ is a normally distributed variable with a mean of 100 and an SD of 15. Ratio IQ. Original but now obsolete concept of IQ as a ratio of mental age to chronological age. Bailey Scales of Infant and Toddler Development, 3rd edition. Developmental assessment for ages 1 to 42 months measures developmental delays in very young. Scores on mental, psychomotor behavior doesn't correlate well with later intelligence scales. Wexler Adult Intelligence Scale, 3rd edition. Ages 17 plus measures IQ, verbal, nonverbal, processing speed, working memory. Stanford-Binet Scale of Intelligence, 5th edition. First IQ test, ages 2 plus, verbal, nonverbal, memory. Cooperative learning. Universal screening. Assess all students to access the students who may be at risk for falling below expectations. Positive behavior support. Continuum of support for all students within a school in the classroom and non-classroom settings. Robert Selman's Neo-Piagetian theory. Undifferentiated perspective taking, social informational perspective taking, self-reflective perspective taking, third-party perspective taking, societal perspective taking. Dodge's model of social exchange. Social info must be encoded greater than compared greater than retrieved. Carl's Lycus psychological first aid. 1 Make contact with the victim, give them permission to express feelings and thoughts to explore problem. 3 Identify possible solutions. 4 Take defined steps to assist. 5 Provide follow-up assistance. 5 Components of effective reading programs. 1 Phonemic awareness. 2 Phonics. 3 Fluency. 4 Vocabulary. 5 Text comprehension. 3 Forms of behavior rehearsal. 1 Covert rehearsal. 2 Overt rehearsal. 3 Verbal rehearsal. L.L. Thurstone's 7 primary abilities. 1 Verbal comp. 2 Word fluency. 3 Number facility. 4 Spatial visualization. 5 Associative memory. 6 Reasoning. 7 Perceptual speed. Robert Sternberg divides intelligence into 3 dimensions: componential, experiential, contextual. Secondary prevention approaches focus on students who have been identified as at risk, typically administered in small groups or individually. FERPA definition of educational records. Records, files, documents, and other materials that contain information directly related to a student and are maintained by an educational agency or institution or by a person acting for such an agency or institution. Letter R. Nonverbal measure of intelligence for children ages 2 to 21 years, useful for children with cognitive difficulties, speech and language delays, or for speakers of another language. 5 memory lanes. 1 semantic, 2 episodic, 3 procedural, 4 automatic, 5 emotional. Semantic memory holds info learned from words. Classroom situations rely heavily on this type of memory, must be stimulated by associations, comparisons and similarities. Episodic memory deals with location. We remember info because it is related to location, also known as contextual or spatial memory. Procedural memory, also known as muscle memory, deals with processes that the body does and remembers. Automatic memory, also known as conditioned response memory, stimuli automatically trigger the memory for information. Emotional memory. Open through the amygdala, the brain always gives priority to emotions, so if your emotional memory takes over, you may lose logic. Emotional memories may cause a release of stress hormones that will change your mind.